By the way, can I have everyone just scoot their cups into the table a little bit?
You were
OCD over here.
fixating on essays in the bathroom for the past 5
I think
minutes.
we should redirect.
We're gonna move on.
Let's redirect the conversation.
So initially, what I was asking you two is, when you contacted me, you said you both were feminists, and you kind of described a little bit about what that means. I suppose my question is, what do you believe in as a feminist, and chiefly, do you believe in the patriarchy theory?
Yes, I believe in the patriarchy. I believe that there is like historical examples of the United States being a patriarchy, and I still think that there are certain ways where it currently exists. I think, interestingly enough, I think in some ways you guys are actually pushing against that when you guys are talking against promiscuity in men, because I think historically it's been accepted, this idea that like, oh, you know, if a man sleeps around, he's just a player, he's just being the alpha. And that's a patriarchal notion. So I actually agree with you guys in the sense that like, hey, you know what, like sleeping around men or women, like that's not necessarily a good idea. But yes, I do believe that like in the general patriarchy, and that there are still like examples of it currently going on.
Okay. Do you think we live in a patriarchy?
Yes, I do. And
That's
I think
why
like
it's
building
awesome.
off of like, I think the question that you asked me was like more related to what my definition of feminism is. I gave it to you a bit earlier, but I also like to explain it to people as feminism really is just like a neutral tool and way of analyzing and understanding the world around us and looking at it through gender relations or sex relations. You can arrive at conservative conclusions or like liberal left-leaning conclusions through it. There's many examples of conservative feminists, rad femmes, TERFs, third wave feminists, like all of these groups are kind of at odds with each other. Yeah, they broadly fall under like we advocate for women's rights, but the way that they decide to go about it is completely different. So there's not one coherent definition of like this feminist ideology guides this group of women or people, because really anybody can claim to be a feminist or employ feminism. Sure. And I just feel like it is a useful tool for anybody to use, because wouldn't you agree that the lives of men and women are so different that to analyze them through that structure is often interesting and insightful?
So you think feminism is a useful tool?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, and just really quick, just to bring you two into it, I don't know if you guys identify as feminist, Destiny. Consider yourself feminist? Okay. So
I think, to be clear, that term has become so broad that it's kind of like meaningless, right?
Sure.
Like one way of fighting for equity as a feminist could just be that like any kind of like structural barriers that women face entering like certain fields of education should be removed. But other people might argue that like,
do those even exist?
most
they
of
have
them
a
at this
better
point,
chance of getting accepted usually when you're a woman.
Sure, most of the ones that exist now are probably like cultural in nature, and a lot of those I think have been largely eroded, probably especially over the past like 10 or 20 years.
Yeah.
But then there are other feminists that will push for way more radical stuff depending on where you want to go on the political spectrum. So it just kind of depends on what you're.
Sure. And just so we all agree on definitions here, what is the patriarchy?
The patriarchy is basically this idea that there has been like this system of oppression that mostly benefits men and is in the detriment of women. Now, the patriarchy also negatively affects men. A lot of people have this misconception that's like, oh, the patriarchy like only benefits men, like men aren't hurt by it. No, there are clear examples of ways that men are hurt by the patriarchy. But this idea that it basically usually favors men or puts them on top to the detriment of women, generally speaking.
Can you give some examples of how men have been like boosted ahead and women have been like detrimentally damaged due to the patriarchy?
How men have been detrimentally damaged?
No, how your original point was women are damaged to put men up in the patriarchy. Do you have some examples?
Yes, and I think this is kind of a unique space because every other red pill space I've been in has had this idea that like men should like continue like sleeping around and trying to like, you know, like deflower women and like not marry them and just like, you know, like fuck around, have fun. And continuously basically like if women decide to like follow that lead, oh, they're stupid whores, they're like dumb bitches, like, you know, they don't know what the fuck they're doing, like, you know, they should just like shut the fuck up and go away, right? And I feel like that's a very clear example of like these men reap the benefits of sex while simultaneously looking down on the woman that they're reaping those benefits from.
How's that related to patriarchy?
Yeah, how's that to a woman's detriment? Like, guys aren't going out with guns and putting them to women's head. Like, you better fucking have sex with me. Like, they're out here getting it in on their own.
Well, it's detrimental to women because when it comes to things like, oh, like the workforce, or when it comes to being taken seriously, like voicing their opinions, their ideas, trying to break into like certain fields. Now they're just, instead of actually viewing the woman as a whole human being, they're judged only on the basis of
it's kind of
there's
hard
no way.
to-
Hold on. There's no logical connection
To the
there.
advantage of women, largely, though.
No, hold on. You just said that woman sleeping around is directly related to her getting a job. That's the kind of
no. Well, I mean,
you just made.
If I am trying to, and this is like,
is body count on on
wait,
resumes
can I
nowadays?
please finish?
Am I missed out on that?
Can I please finish
Go
my
ahead.
sentence?
Go ahead.
Okay. If I am trying to apply to a professional job, and let's say I made the mistake of having OnlyFans or something in the past, and somebody sends that to like my employer, or if somebody's like, oh, you know, like the way that she dresses, or she gives off like slut vibes or whatever, people might see that as like, oh, like unprofessional. And she might be even like the smart, let's say she's extremely smart, intelligent, you know, has multiple degrees, whatever. Because of those mistakes in the past, now it's going to be really hard for her to be taken seriously in a professional sense.
Sounds
But
like the
that's
consequences
absolutely
of your
not
own
true.
actions.
That's like the
So,
opposite of
Yeah,
true.
wait. So wait. Like, how would a guy not experience the exact same degradation if he had an OnlyFans? And they're like, oh, this guy used to do like feet milling. I don't know what the fuck they do, but you know, and that was sent to an employer. How would that like, you know?
Well, the perception.
Wait, hold on. How would that like unequally affect the man in a negative way, the same way it would affect the woman in a negative way? Because using that as an example to prove that men are using the patriarchy to keep women down. So that example doesn't hold up because it holds up to both sides of the sexes.
Well, generally speaking, when a man sleeps around a lot, and we can even go to Fresh and Fit, we can go to all these other red pill spaces, they are claimed to be high value men. Like, they are claimed to be like these men who are, you know, like all the men want to be like them. Like, oh, you should continue sleeping around. Look at all these strategies. I am very appreciative that right now that this space doesn't agree with that. But the truth of the matter is that in all these other spaces promoting the red pill, they say the complete opposite. They say men should sleep around a lot. That's good for that.
There's no sense. So you're trying to say like a guy could be like, hey, I want to be a doctor, and let me show you these 30 fucking sluts from Miami I fucked. And that's not going to benefit
I'm
him.
like so charismatic and so
So-
influential. I can convince like 30 women to sleep
Are
with me.
you saying that
I'm so
matriarchy
cool.
would be better? Are you
Does that
saying
even
that
make
a
any
What?
sense?
Are you
You're
okay.
acting like if it
Are you
doesn't-
saying
Wait.
that
I
a
think
society
the gist
founded
of what
upon-
she's saying is that there tends to be greater social repercussions for women that have engaged
That
in
do sex
sexuality
Well,
openly.
if you take
or
if you take an OnlyFans to your job application, like, look, I want to be this fucking
Well,
X-ray
I'm not saying
tech,
put it
but
in your
I also
resume.
sucked like 30 dudes' dicks.
No.
on
Maybe
fucking
10 years
OnlyFans.
ago, but we're neglecting that the people who staff HR departments are overwhelmingly like these girl boss
this
types
is an
who would probably
anecdote,
be
but I
empowered by
watched a
things like that.
documentary called Life After Porn, and they analyzed the differences between male porn stars and talent after they left the industry and female porn stars after they left the industry. And the women, overwhelmingly in that documentary, were socially ostracized and ended up getting back into the industry, whereas the men were able
Well,
to.
I
I would
made
argue
over a
that
decade ago.
that's
Hold on.
not
Hold on,
actually
hold on, hold on,
unfair
hold on.
because there are
I
objective
never said it was
differences
unfair. I'm
between
literally
male
just
and
saying that
female
that was the case,
sexuality.
and that was what the documentary
I mean,
showed.
all you have
Okay,
to
hold
do-
on. Yo, hold on.
Right.
So, I mean, but if you look at most adult content, oftentimes there's always a female name, but half the time you don't even see the male, you don't know the male actor.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, there's differences on that level, but I would suspect, going back to your point, I would suspect if, you know, you take two people, a woman, a man, they both did adult content, they're trying to get a job, I think it's going to kind of reflect poorly on both of them if it's like a job that requires some sort of decorum or seriousness.
I understand what you're saying, and you're basically saying, oh, there's a general stigma against sex work, which is true.
But is that
even
the
if
best?
we take,
That's the one example you go
wait.
to when I'm asking about the patriarchy.
we're asking how the
That's a
patriarchy
fairly
is-
weak-
You asked for one example, and I gave
Can
you
I
one
take
example.
a
Those are bad examples.
Can I take a step of this? Okay. I think when people talk about the patriarchy in the broadest of sense, what we're really saying is that historically speaking, men have kind of been granted all of the autonomy in directing society, and women are, even though in some ways they're benefiting from the patriarchy, they're kind of like the subjects of men. So men exist to make decisions financially. They're the leaders of business. They're the leaders of banks. Men exist to make decisions about wars and the state of the country. They're the head of the political systems. They're our presidents. They're our congressmen. And men are the ones making decisions about how women live their lives. They're the head of the household. They're the ones working jobs predominantly, so they're choosing where people live. So when people criticize the patriarchy, in some ways the patriarchy benefits and hurts men. In some ways the patriarchy benefits and hurts women. But I think what people are generally looking at is the autonomous aspect. That in patriarchy, even if you are benefited and hurt a bit as a man, ultimately, you have a lot of autonomy. You've got a lot of different ways that you can decide to live your life. Some of these come out in good ways, like you can have jobs, you can be single, you can do whatever. Some of these come out in bad ways. You're more likely to join the military or work really shitty jobs. And then same thing with women. There are ways that it can benefit you or hurt you. It can benefit you in that you don't have to work. You can stay home and take care of a kid. It can hurt you in that you're subjugated to a pretty narrow set of roles. But the main issue is that feminists would argue that in a patriarchal system, the man has a much wider range to express his desires and how he wants to exist in the world, whereas women are kind of like, you have to do this one thing, otherwise you're going to be heavily socially or sometimes even legally ostracized for it.
Well,
I think it's like the broadest argument.
I disagree with you a little bit there on your last point. I think actually if you look at kind of the options that women have, I think they have more options than do men. For example, in terms of partnering up with a woman, I would say men overwhelmingly, women have kind of two choices. They can find a man who's prepared to provide for them. They can be the stay-at-home. Not all women are going to be able to secure that option, but it's there for some women. Or,
to be clear, I'm just saying historically, this is like today, as society exists today is a lot different than it was in the 1800s, right? I'm just saying historically when we talk about patriarchy.
Okay.
Because as it exists today, a lot of what is quote unquote patriarchy is really we're talking about very nuanced social pressures and a little bit of litigation. So maybe around like abortion. But broadly speaking, like a lot of the issues related to women and having freedom in society have been ameliorated. Women can go to school, they can have jobs, they can exist on their own. Like largely speaking, they've got a lot more freedom now than they did even 50 years ago.
Well, sure.
Thanks largely in due to feminists.
Gotcha. And just to bring it back to you guys, I mean, my sense of the patriarchy, it's basically QAnon for feminists, but so it's like a conspiracy theory. But
wait, we got to continue to use the number one weakness of feminism, which is accountability. So you said that men are being lifted up and women are being put under men, and men are having like these gigantic leaps and bounds in today's modern society at the detriment of women.
I never said giant leaps and bounds. I said
well,
general benefits.
that's what the patriarchy is. It's just like this big phantom boogeyman that's here to oppress all women. So I just wanted you to clarify on your point, because you didn't give an example. Destiny had to jump in. So what's your example? Because you used OnlyFans on a
No, I didn't use OnlyFans. I was trying to use this. Okay, first of all, the general point I was trying to make is that if you find out a guy has slept with 30 women, a lot of people see that guy as like a player, as charismatic, et cetera, et cetera. If you find out a woman has slept with 30 men.
She's from the streets, or
okay,
yeah,
Pixie,
I think
this is a very
but beyond that, I
stigma
can give you
comes
other
from
examples.
the objective differences between male and female sexuality, not from a cultural stigma that has just been artificially imbued into us. There are objective differences between the decisions that women make in the so-called sexual marketplace and the decisions that men make in it, because women are the gatekeepers of sex.
Okay, can you explain to that? Or I'm genuinely curious. I just want to understand like your logic and your thought process.
But hold on.
Still no example?
Okay. Wait,
hold on. Let me
everybody
I just got to interrupt you really quick.
Still no example? I'm waiting.
I'll give you your
hold
example.
on.
Let
me just interrupt you really quick here. I feel fucking terrible having the straw man for a feminist, but like you keep going back to this body count thing. I'm anti-feminist, but I'm familiar with feminist arguments. Like this whole men and women being judged differently because of on their sexuality is like such a low priority for feminists. I'm confused why that's your first thing that you're going
because
to. I know it's related to dating.
Were you saying
I mean,
that
you
was
asked for one example. You didn't ask for like
were
the
you
most
saying,
important
all right,
example.
everybody, hold on.
Okay.
Were you saying that was a benefit for men of the patriarchy, that men are able to sexually take advantage of women?
Yes, but also the reason why I brought that up is because since you guys kept repeating like this is a dating podcast, like relationships, that was one of the first things that my mind went to. But I do have other examples of like patriarchal like structures.
Before we get to, I find this very, very fascinating. So, are you acknowledging that men running through women, that's a bad thing?
Yes, but society as a whole doesn't seem to agree with my opinion.
Doesn't seem to agree with that. And you're saying men running through women, this is one of the negative aspects of patriarchy, and it's one of the things that men benefit from when it comes to patriarchy. Is that correct? Would you say? Framing?
Society as a whole views that as a benefit to men.
Okay. And is that,
that's what I'm saying.
Hold on.
I have my personal opinion that's disagreeing with that. But in general, if we're talking about how society generally views the patriarchy, how society generally views women and men, society generally will prop up a man if he engages in that behavior.
Is that because of patriarchy, you're saying?
I do think that's an extension of patriarchy. This idea that like men are more capable, that men are, like stronger, and therefore like those actions are supposed to indicate like strength.
I have one thing really quick.
I'm trying to make a point.
What?
He's trying to make a point, goddammit. Let him make his point.
I've listened.
He's put his mic on the table, he's leaning forward.
One thing.
I've listened for 20 minutes. Please
just
go ahead.
one thing.
Oh my God.
Is the patriarchy stronger now? Or was it stronger, say, 100 years ago?
Oh, it was stronger 100 years ago. I think we've made great advancements.
And so
in
you're
women's
blaming,
rights.
but the patriarchy was stronger, say, 100 years ago, but now in today's day and age when it's ostensibly the weakest it's ever been. How can you pin?
So this is
premise?
Brian. Let me
Is
take
that
it
where
from
you're
here. This is kind of he's leading to my point. Okay, you and I both agree that men running through women is detrimental to our society. Correct?
Yes.
The argument that I would make is in years past, when there were stronger patriarchal structures over society, there were decreased rates of men running through women because we had greater amounts of tradition in society. This whole sexual liberation thing that is intimately tied into feminism, I would say that feminism is largely to blame for so many women in our society getting run through, because earlier in the conversation, Destiny was making the point that nowadays we live in a society where a lot of women, both liberal and conservative alike, they want to go and build their careers and they want to go and enjoy their lives. And a big part of that enjoyment of their lives involves being sexually free in their 20s. That thing that you dislike, that is a fruit of feminism.
Yeah.
And it's one of the things historically that patriarchy protected against, because traditionally speaking, it was a father's job to protect his daughter's virginity and her purity and all that kind of stuff. That's a good thing for society. This sexual liberation stuff that's burning women is a fruit of feminism.
Yeah,
That's a very, sorry, let me just respond to that quickly.
All right.
That's a very interesting point. However, when I look at historically examples of like what has happened between men and women's relationships, you still have structures of the patriarchy that still incentivize like men to like either sleep around or not face negative repercussions necessarily for sleeping around, until the advent of feminism also tried to help fight against that. So
that was
let
at
me
the
just
absolute
finish.
top of society, though, and
Wait,
a very small
wait,
amount
wait.
of men. It was nowhere near like it is today.
Okay,
Can I just-
but the idea that like, oh, if a man cheats on you, it's the woman's fault. She was not a good enough wife. She was not like good enough, whatever. Existed for decades, right? This idea that like, sorry, I kind of lost my train of thought.
Well, I think
Okay,
that
I just-
Christian patriarchy, infidelity in marriage was frowned upon for
Yes.
everyone.
Yes.
Yeah,
It was frowned upon
More than
for
it is
everyone,
now.
but women before the advent of feminism weren't able to break away from those from that.
I just
Basically.
wanted to say
they
that-
were stuck in
Let her
these-
finish her
yeah.
point, please,
Okay,
Nev.
yeah, sorry.
They were stuck in these cycles where it was like, okay, my husband cheats on me, or my husband leaves me, he's an alcoholic, he's doing all this. Well, because there's no fault divorce, I'm stuck with him. I have to take this abuse. He could be physically abusive.
But those were situations with fault for divorce. That was grounds for divorce, abuse,
Yeah,
alcoholism.
but even
cheating.
then, the
even
idea
the
that
Catholic
you have
Church
to-
sees cheating as grounds for divorce.
Even
So
then,
you
the
had
idea
grounds.
the idea that you have to go through this whole court process to prove that your husband actually did this stuff to you and that you didn't deserve it, right? Because those were the thoughts back in the day, that if your husband does anything to you, well, it's your fault because you weren't a good enough wife, you weren't a good enough mother, whatever. Did stop women from being able to be liberated or be able to get the rights that they deserved.
Kind of like what men have to go through nowadays with false rape accusations and all that.
Yep.
Yeah, nowadays the reasons for divorce aren't the things you've listed. It's literally just
Grape
women being
accusations.
Like, I
Grape.
feel vaguely
Grape.
unfulfilled
Sorry,
in
sorry,
this
sorry.
relationship.
Grape.
Yeah. Can I just say, I think that you are actively
It's a great point, John.
perpetuating the patriarchy that you're cursing and blaming everything on by endorsing like OnlyFans and stuff, by saying,
When did I ever endorse
well, just by
OnlyFans?
like promoting the stuff like
When did I promote it?
earlier.
When did I
Do
promote
it.
it
You
earlier?
started bringing OnlyFans into things as if like people
No,
wouldn't judge you
I
for
said.
it.
Well, I said like, yeah, women are judged for having OnlyFans. I
That
didn't
was
say
the most
OnlyFans is
niche
good.
example ever.
Should
like,
women not be
no.
judged for?
Yeah, I
You
think
guys-
that's
Yeah, and
the
if they're
thing.
false rape accusations, is a very niche example. Too.
I think you're
fair
perpetuating.
play.
No.
But I mean, come on, Destiny,
Also,
come on.
you're
Hey,
strong
hey,
men.
hey,
OnlyFans
everybody,
in the job
everybody,
interview.
everybody, for the sake of Brian's channel, if we're going to talk about SA, let's use the word grape,
My bad.
okay?
So
That's
for
okay.
SA though, Destiny, come on, pulling up like, oh, we see you may have had an OnlyFans account.
No, but
That's
you're
a
straw
pretty-
manning me. I used
that was my
OnlyFans as an
example.
example, but what I was trying to elaborate, or what
It's
I
so
was trying
bad
to
Destiny doesn't
illustrate,
defend
is
you.
that even without OnlyFans, if you find out, or a rumor or whatever, that a woman has slept around with 30 men, they're going to look down on that woman. Forget
See,
OnlyFans, forget
naturally
anything
Rightfully
else.
It's
so.
more
Rightfully
feminist
so.
to hold women accountable for their actions and believe that they have full agency over their sexuality, and hold them accountable when they've done things unwise with their sexuality.
And
the
as
bell
a
That's a more
feminist,
feminist option
Hit the
than
bell
considering them to be just tiny, like
audio
angel babies who
No, and
deserve
as
to
a-
be defended no matter what they do.
and as a feminist, I agree, but I also think we should hold men accountable for these
Well,
actions
who
as
do you,
well.
Who do you
we're
think?
good.
You seem
Come
to
in,
think
Billy,
that women
Billy,
shouldn't
come in.
be judged
Hold
for
on.
having an
Let's let Billy.
OnlyFans.
Let's let Billy.
Wait,
go ahead.
what? Sorry, can you repeat that?
You seem to think that women should not be judged for choosing to do porn.
I think it depends on the circumstance.
There is
Absolutely.
no circumstance
Okay.
where it's acceptable.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
sorry,
hold
but
on.
there are
Hold
so
on,
many
hold on,
women
hold
who
on.
get into sex trafficking who start
Okay, that is
OnlyFans because
not
they get the, you know,
That is
abusive.
not the example that you gave us. You gave
Well,
us the
I was-
example of a woman
okay.
with OnlyFans.
No, I was giving a general example of like, oh, the idea of when women are judged more harshly.
Women-
But if you want, I'm gonna elaborate now, or I'm gonna clarify
Okay.
now. That's just an example, right? There are. You asked, oh, do you think women should never be judged for OnlyFans? I never said that. I do think that there are certain scenarios where they
How
shouldn't
about
be
all
judged as
scenarios?
harshly.
Okay, all right,
How about
hold
all
on.
scenarios
So
So
for the
if you-
sake of conversation,
Let's
with
bring
all,
Billy
with all
into
due
it.
respect,
So AIDS.
we could go around and around and around with this, but you have like kind of like every single answer you give, it's kind of qualified. Like in some cases this, but in other cases
Because
that.
life is
It's
not
almost
black
like
and
it's a
white.
nuanced discussion that's not going
Yeah,
to
I mean, you
trend
could
towards
you
yes,
can
no
you can
answers.
make every single thing nuanced is the point, but it's not fruitful for the overall
I think
discussion.